Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Professor Mika Berry and Rafi Bongar for giving me this opportunity to present at the VEDA conference. Today, I will be presenting my research on the topic, the story of the bnei Menashe community in Israel. This is part of my PhD studies, where I compare the migration and integration of bnei Israel and bnei Menashe in the state of Israel at two different time periods. It is not only a migration story, but one of faith, resilience, and identity transformation. My research is guided by two main questions. First, how have institutional and structural factors, particularly the role of the Orthodox religious establishment, shaped the migration and integration of the bnei Menashe between 1995 and 2015? The second question is, what are the key differences between first generation and second generation immigrants in terms of education, employment, cultural adaptation, and balancing their Indian heritage with Israeli life? Through these questions, I aim to capture the complex intersection of migration policies, religious validation, and lived experiences of this community. The methodology used is qualitative research with in-depth interviews, participant observation, and archival research. What makes Indian Jewish communities unique in world Jewry is that there is no recorded anti-Semitic incident against Indian Jewish communities by the local citizens. To give some context, India has hosted several distinct Jewish communities over the centuries. The bnei Israel in Mumbai, the Cochin Jews in Kerala, the Baghdadi Jews in Calcutta and Bombay, and of course the bnei Menashe from Manipur and Mizoram. Among these, the bnei Menashe stand out because of their geographical location in India's northeastern periphery, their tribal heritage, and their claim of descent from the biblical lost tribe of Menashe. This historical background helps us understand the uniqueness of their migration journey. Who are the bnei Menashe? The bnei Menashe are composed of three main tribal groups: the Kuki, the Mizo, and the Chin, collectively known as So people, Chinkim or Shinlung. They come primarily from the states of Manipur and Mizoram, which share border with the country of Myanmar. They were accepted as the lost tribe belonging to the tribe of Menashe by the Israeli rabbinate in 2005 by the declaration of the Sephardic chief rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Amar. The migration to Israel began in 1989, mostly among youth via tourist visa, and continues to this day. About 5,000 bnei Menashe now live in Israel, while 5,000 another remain in India. Let me briefly trace bnei Menashe's historical transformation on how they came to Judaism. Before 1890s, these tribes practiced animistic traditions, that is, the worship of natural spirits, ritual sacrifices, etc. The Christian missionaries arrived in Mizoram and Manipur in 1894. The Protestant missionaries, mainly the Baptist and the Presbyterian Church, did missionary activities and started converting them to Christianity. Along with this missionary works in 1912, they also gained control over education and paved way for the westernization in the following years. While these missionary groups followed a puritanical approach to the spread of gospel, the Welsh missionaries in 1908 provided a different framework which included prophecy, possession cults, and speaking in tongues. And this sowed the seeds of revivalism, which was part of their millenarian theological approach. This seeds grew through the United Pentecostal Church, which became the third largest denomination in Mizoram. The significant impact of these missionary teachings was that they tried connecting their tribal practice with Bible's Old Testament. Having rich tribal heritage, these communities used to practice ritual sacrifices. With access to these missionary teachings, they started connecting their practices with biblical practices and found similarities. This exposure to prophecy, possession cults, and the ability to link their traditions before Christianity led to the emergence of visions among members of the tribal group. In 1936, a member of the community had a vision that they were part of Eretz Israel. In 1946, they had a vision that the people to survive the forthcoming Armageddon, need to restore their religious practice ordained in the Bible and return and settle in the promised land. In 1951 vision says that Mizos were part of the lost tribes of Israel. However, in 1970 marked a crucial turning point. The Manipur Jews organization was formed, but though it was Christian Zionist in nature. Between 1972 and 1976, they established contact with other Jewish communities in India, mainly in Bombay and Calcutta, and to the Israeli consulate, and turned to support and advice on how to practice Judaism. People went to Bombay to learn about Judaism, and in April 1976, during Passover, Judaism officially embraced in this region. That same year, the first synagogue, Beth Shalom, was built in Chacharpur in Manipur. In October 1974, a new group called the United Jews of Northeast India was formed, separating them from other Messianic Jewish communities who believed in Jesus Christ. In 1979, Rabbi Eliyahu Avihai made contact with the community, and in the following year, a handful of young men came to Jerusalem for studies. Between 1989 and 2003, Rabbi Avihai arranged the migration of 850 members, and their giur was conducted after their arrival in Israel. From 2004 onwards, Shavei Israel, led by Michael Freund, took charge of the Aliyah. This journey represents one of the most dramatic religious shifts in modern history. Within a century, a community moving from animism to Christianity and then to Judaism. Now, I would like to bring your attention to some of the archival materials I accessed from Israeli repositories. These documents shed light on the early stages of bnei Menashe communities' emerging Jewish consciousness and their engagement with Zionism. The first is a 1959 letter written by Reverend H.S. Lueya, a Baptist pastor from Mizoram, in which he notes, "Many members of my community are being convinced that they are descendants of the Jews, and therefore they expect that the time will come when they can move to Palestine and live here." This statement not only reflects the nascent belief within my Mizoram communities and their Israelite origins, but also reveals an early spiritual and emotional connection with the idea of returning to the Zion, well before institutional recognition and organized migration efforts began. The second document, dated 1960, elaborates on the spread of Zionist ideas among groups later identified as bnei Menashe, offering a detailed account on how self-perceived origins, communal visions, and expectations concerning a future connection to Israel. Together, these documents demonstrate that awareness and interest of bnei Menashe existed within Jewish and Israeli circles long before their formal acceptance as part of the Jewish people. Further evidence comes from two letters written by Professor Nissim Ezekiel to the Joint Distribution Committee in 1987, in which he explicitly supports bnei Menashe's claim of Jewish descent and advocates for their inclusion within the broader Jewish fold. Ezekiel's correspondence highlights the solidarity and recognition extended by members of the established Indian Jewish communities, particularly the bnei Israel, towards bnei Menashe. This letter illustrates that support for the Jewish identity was not only external from Israeli and Zionist institutions, but also internal, emerging from within Indian Jewish milieu itself. To analyze bnei Menashe and their integration, I draw two frameworks. The first is the segmented assimilation theory. This theory emerged as a refinement of the classic assimilation model in immigration studies. Traditionally, assimilation was seen as a linear process where immigrants and their children gradually adopt the host society's culture, language, and norms. The second is the social capital theory. This theory is about the value of social networks, trust, and norms of reciprocity that individuals and groups can draw on for support and resources. The diagram illustrates how different forms of social capital influence assimilation pathways to bnei Menashe. The first is the bridging social capital through army service, friendship with other Israelis. It enables a mobility towards upward assimilation for bnei Menashe. With Hebrew fluency, army service, and higher education, they achieve mobility much easier. The second is the bonding social capital through family and religious cohesion. It supports selective assimilation by preserving identity and preventing a downward drift. For the bnei Menashe, many pursued selective assimilation, maintaining strong religious and communal ties while gradually integrating into Israeli society. The final is the weak clinging social capital through limited institutional support and recognition, and increases the chance of downward assimilation. For some bnei Menashe, they faced weak institutional support, discrimination, or credential barriers, and risk downward assimilation into low-wage jobs and limited mobility. One of the major questions is what motivated their aliyah or migration to Eretz Israel. From the study, I was able to identify three main factors. The first is Judaic faith, the belief that they were Israelites returning home. In an interview I had with one of the prominent figures of the community, he told me that the Israeli Orthodoxy and the rabbinate took this community on their shoulder and imparted to them an orthodox way of Judaism and eventually helped them their migration. Commitment to orthodoxy was a predecessor for their migration. The second is the influence of Christian Zionist missionaries who had already planted the ideas of their connection to Eretz Israel. Even today, many of the groups back in India, which is almost 3 million strong, does not believe or practice Judaism. But there is a strong faith among all these groups that they have some connection to the lost tribe of Menashe, and this expression is reflected in the Jewish symbolism that they blend with the Christian faith back in India. It is also related to their vision and millennial ideas, which I mentioned earlier. And the third is the difficult economic and political conditions in northeast of India. Constant wars, lack of economic development. Still today, there are internal wars happening in this area of Manipur between Kukis and Meiteis. The migration began in 1989 informally with 9 young adults, and by early 2000s, hundreds have undergone the Giur process. Today, most of them are settled in Israel's northern periphery in towns like Kiryat Shmona, Malot, Afula, Migdal Hameh, as well as in Judah and Samaria and Sderot in the south. Let me give you an idea about the organizations that support bnei Menashe. Several organizations have played key roles. The first is Rabbi Avihai's organization founded in 1975, who sought to connect lost tribes, including the bnei Menashe. The second is Shavei Israel, founded in 2002, actively identified lost tribes worldwide and facilitated their migration. The third is Degel Menashe, founded in 2019, which focuses on integration within the Israeli society through education, vocation, and through social integration. The fourth is Shifte Menashe, founded by Rabbi David in 2014, to promote relationship between bnei Menashe in Israel and all over the world, and also to discuss matters of religion. These organizations represent different religious, political, and practical approaches, which in turn shape the community's migration and settlement. The political, cultural, and social challenges. Despite their strong faith and resilience, the bnei Menashe have faced many challenges. They were often misidentified as Thai or Chinese workers, leading to stereotyping and even xenophobia during COVID-19. For the second generation, the identity struggles, for example in schools, where they felt different due to their appearance, food, culture, and often stick to their own groups. Second, religiously, the Jewish status was not automatically accepted. Orthodox rabbinic conversion was required, creating tensions between their ancestry and institutional validation. But when I interviewed participants, none of them felt ashamed to do a Giur process. Instead, they emphasized that it is important, unlike many of the Ethiopian communities. The third, geographically being settled in the peripheral areas, they had limited access to jobs and resources. A second generation told me that there is still limited awareness about the community. Even in a settlement like Kiryat Arba, people are often unfamiliar with their history. First generation migrants also struggled with Hebrew language, which also hindered their education and employment opportunities. Access to higher education was restricted due to finance, language, and also recognition credentials. A second generation told me that we faced an invisible glass ceiling where talented individuals sometimes lack confidence to advance or these are shaped by an intergenerational trauma that they inherited from their parents. Culturally, the younger generations are also less interested in preserving traditional practices, leading to intergenerational tensions. Together, these challenges highlight the complex terrain of integration. Confronting racism. One incident brought all these challenges into sharp focus was the murder of Yoel Langhal, a young bnei Menashe man on October 7, 2022, when he traveled north to Kiryat Shmona from his home in Norfolk to visit a friend and a fellow immigrant from India. His tragic death exposed deep-rooted racism and institutional neglect. This case reached Knesset MK Penina Tamano-Shata from the National Unity Party, herself of Ethiopian origin, emphasized that this murder highlighted how immigrant youth often lack institutional support and feel helpless. She criticized the police and called for justice for Yoel's family. This case forced the state to confront the reality of racism, exclusion, and institutional failure. In an interview with the bnei Menashe from Kiryat Arba, she told me that the incident where the bnei Menashe member was killed in Kiryat Shmona was partly because the locals felt intimidated by someone who is different. On March 14, 2020, during COVID-19 outbreak, Shalem Singh's son and his friends were set up on by two hooligans in Tiberias who began cursing at them shouting, "Corona Chinese," because of their physical and ethnic features. They pummeled Shalem before kicking him repeatedly in his chest once he fell to the ground, which necessitated his hospitalization. This was a report from Jerusalem Post. Overcoming the challenges, the first generation and the second generation. For the first generation, the focus was always on survival. They overcame linguistic, cultural barriers through Ulpan courses, community networks, strong work ethics. The bnei Menashe families lived and stuck together, supporting each other socially, emotionally. Many felt safer and more understood within their own community, and that's why the settlements are growing and many haven't even moved out of the places when they first arrived. The second is, many began in low-paying jobs, but gradually built livelihoods. A question is often asked, why did a predominantly agrarian group of people back in India were not made agriculturalists in Israel rather than sent to work in factories? They also underwent halakhic conversion to gain Jewish recognition. Despite feeling it questioned their identity, this step allowed them to gain religious legitimacy within the Israeli society. Also, they started building alliances with political parties such as Likud and Shas. Also, the government national service programs and NGOs like Shava Israel and Degel Menashe started providing assistance and helped them in their integration in the Israeli society. For the second generation had a different trajectory. Growing up in Israel and already fluent in Hebrew, they served in the Israeli military, which opened doors to education and careers. Identity was less framed by a return from exile and more by being born into Israel as Jews, with little connection to India. They broke away from the insecurities that their parents carried with them. They have also been able to balance their bnei Menashe traditions with Israeli cultural norms, creating a hybrid identity. Cultural balancing, maintaining certain food traditions, tribal customs in terms of marriage rituals, and also adopting Israeli norms by also retaining the surnames, for example, Vaipe, Tanjong, etc. Many have also become leaders advocating for their community and supporting newer immigrants. Many are also moving out of traditional bnei Menashe settlements into central cities, integrating into wider Israeli society. But cases like the murder of Yoel Langhal deeply shook the community. Their response was both emotional and political, mobilizing community protests, demanding accountability in the Knesset, and drawing national attention to institutional failures. This tragedy also pushed them to build stronger support systems for vulnerable youth and demand more government resources. So, while the first generation laid the groundwork, the second generation had pursued deeper integration and leadership. In fact, a recent Knesset committee recommended a 5-year plan dedicated to the bnei Menashe, including support for education, housing, and integration resources. This shows how their identity negotiation is not just cultural, but also institutional and political. As scholars Gideon Eliezer and Miriam believe know, bnei Menashe's integration into Israeli society is shaped by their distinct physical appearance, cultural differences, and the ignorance of many Israelis about their identity. This quote captures the essence of my findings, that the integration is not only about policies and opportunities, but also about perceptions and social acceptance. Migration continues even today, with new groups arriving and many more yet to arrive. At the same time, academic interest in this community is growing, as seen in many recent publications. My own work builds on this literature while providing a comparative and generational perspective. Now, I would like to show you a small video which I was able to access from the archives in just 1 minute.
שלום למזורם, שלום לכל בני מנשה, להתראות בארץ, התקיים. שלושים ותשעה צעירים וצעירות מבני מנשה בעיר מרצה. המולה גדולה בשמחה. בשדה התעופה הם נוסעים ישירות ליישוב בנובמבר של גוש קטיף. שם יעבדו, ילמדו עברית ויהדות, ויעברו הליכי גיור במדרש על פי ההלכה.
To conclude, the bnei Menashe's migration story is more than a story of relocation. It's a story of faith, the belief in their Israelite ancestry. It's a story of resilience, surviving hardships, prejudice, and institutional neglect and long waiting periods for Aliyah. And it's a story of belonging, negotiating who they are in the face of multiple identities: tribal, Jewish, Israeli, Indian, and indeed bnei Menashe. Thank you very much.